If you look at payroll generally, it is providing a service that's non-flexible within a business. In the majority of cases, it's probably the biggest cost, but also the most important aspect for the staff themselves to be able to do their job. Let's be honest, we hopefully work to live, not live to work, but principally it's about ensuring that pay is not one of the problems that a business has. I think there are certainly industries within the UK especially where the payroll itself is still a function, it's still a resource, but the difference now is that the noise that comes out of the payroll is very different to a decade ago.
Keeping businesses thriving, compliance and safe, forecasting strategy, it's all on our mind. It's time payroll took its place in the boardroom to shine.
Managing a global team is complex, but Deel makes it simpler with payroll, HR, IT, and compliance all in one place. That's why over 35,000 businesses trust Deel to hire, pay, and manage their teams worldwide. See how Deel works at deel.com/nickday. That's DEEL.com/NICKDAY. Deel, your forever people platform. Hello and welcome back to the Payroll Podcast, the show that brings together the greatest minds, the greatest people in payroll to help you, our listeners, or indeed if you're watching us on YouTube, our audience, to really stay ahead of this never ever changing and evolving industry. And today I'm really excited because I'm bringing you Richard George. Richard is the first ever guest I had on this show when we launched way back in 2018. I'll give a little bit of an intro to Richard.
We both look a lot younger, by the way.
Yeah, I think you look, but you've held it better than me. I was bushy-tailed in those days, Richard. We've come a long way. I remember being very nervous delivering that particular interview. I think we had to do the introduction about 5 times because I kept stumbling over my words. But anyway, if you are new to the show, I am your host. My name is Nick Day. I'm the CEO at JGA Recruitment Group. We are specialist payroll recruiters. I'm also, of course, the facilitator of another wonderful show where I share the platform with Richard called Payroll Question Time. And let's talk a little bit about Richard. He is Director of Education at the Payroll Centre. And notably, as I mentioned, my very first guest but on this show. But actually, you've been back since then as well. I believe this is your 3rd time.
I think so,
on
absolutely.
The Payroll Podcast.
Very
You've
much
got
so.
many decades of payroll expertise under your belts. We've worked together as candidate as well. I know you've worked for some major companies during your time, and you've always been one of my go-to experts when it comes to payroll compliance, education, legislation, and of course, training. I know you've helped thousands of payroll professionals up and down the UK and across the globe, to be fair, to really stay on the right side of the track when it comes to payroll. So I'm hoping I can help you get your expertise to help our listeners stay on the right side of the track, as well as we talk about one of the hottest topics in 2025, and that's the future of payrolling benefits. So without further ado, Richard, welcome back for the 3rd time to the Payroll Podcast. How you doing, my friend?
Thank you for having me. So yeah, Richard George, as Nick quite rightly said, 39 years now in payroll, 20 years doing, and since then a variety of roles from bureaus to providers to education for the last decade or so. So the Payroll Centre, UK's largest face-to-face training company, but people come to us for so many things. And really our sort of ethos is giving the payroll industry the opportunity to learn, to keep up to date and to educate. So whether it be face-to-face courses such as the Successful PU and various others, to membership with obviously things like help desk, blogs, webinars and the like, or just our half days. So as Nick quite rightly said, we're currently sort of going through the making payrolling benefits mandatory. We're about to introduce the new sickness, which is going to be the next one before the end of the year. So it's really just constantly supporting the industry. And in line with that, our sort of, I guess, assessment solutions with things like ACT, really just trying to ensure the industry is up to date, up to speed, and people understand the knowledge that they need to do the job.
Yeah. Fantastic. And I should also add, because we met when you were still at JP Morgan. So you've worked in the banking sector. We were part of your support network, if you like, when you moved to Starbucks. You've worked in that kind of environment as well. And of course, you've been in training and you worked in bureau as well. So you've got many different hats, lots of expertise to bring to the show. And over those 39 years, we've also become friends. So for full transparency, Richard and I shared a holiday where we cycled through France and all the way to Italy. So we've had some good times in the past as well on our bike. So you're always on the road. You've travelled all over the UK in particular to train people about something which we're all passionate about on the show, which of course is payroll. So let me start here. What does the word payroll mean to you, Richard?
Um, I think if you look at payroll generally, it is providing a service that's flexible within a business. In the majority of cases, it's probably the biggest cost, but also the most important aspect for the staff themselves to be able to do their job. Let's be honest, we hopefully work to live, not live to work. In some cases, with some form of work-life balance, but principally, it's about ensuring that pay is not one of the problems that a business has. Ensuring it's accurate, on time, and really, probably more so, and I'm sure that you'll agree with me, over the last 10 years especially, payroll itself has changed very dramatically from being a service to actually being part of a decision. So that expansion far more into forecast, budget, sitting on far more senior tables within businesses themselves, and it becoming a far bigger influencer in the direction the businesses take.
Absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. And that leads us to an interesting question here because there's a lot of talk about AI, and let's not just focus on AI, but also technology advancing the profession. And yet, actually, it's becoming increasingly more complicated. Most payroll people are working harder than ever. There's still a lot of burnout out there. And one of the things that you and I speak about a lot on PQT, which is the Payroll Question Time show, is around the payrolling of benefits landscape, which can be quite complicated. A lot of people have questions around how we payroll benefits. So, what does that landscape look like right now, and how has it evolved? We mentioned the industry's changed a lot. How have you seen that element of payroll change?
Well, again, I think it is partly down to the place that we've got to. So, possibly in the last year, especially, we've seen a change of government, certainly a very different change in direction around the government's view of cost. But then you add the other issues that we've had since COVID, whether it be wars, whether it be inflation, you see the link between them. And principally, businesses are struggling. I think it's fair to say that there are a lot of companies that really can't forecast or guess the future. We've been hearing from the government there is a very high chance, for instance, that the next budget we could see further increases to taxation. So where you're getting the issue, therefore, and we certainly see it when we go out, and as you quite rightly said, we meet thousands of people in payroll, is just the insecurity and uncertainty, which is meaning that the remuneration itself is fairly static currently, or possibly going the other way altogether. So I think where that therefore puts us is a place where how do we, reward our staff? What is it that makes us the employer of choice? Because hybrid now isn't going to be the only thing. 2 years ago, offered a hybrid job, people would bite your hand off. But now, and again, in your world, hybrid's an expectation now rather than a want. So how do we make ourselves better, different, the employer of choice? And the likelihood is in the current environment, that's not going to be cash because there isn't the cash to give, or the increase ability of an employer is going to be low. So on those grounds, there's been a much bigger focus, whether it be through salary sacrifice, whether it be through partnership, that benefits can become that difference. So we've seen continual escalation in the use of salary sacrifice, for instance, within the industry, whether that be the legacies or whether we look at sort of a broader stroke or broader canvas of what we can bring through Opera, or whether it be just general transition. And technology's making such a difference to that because of the ability of an employee to self-manage. So whether it be portals, separate devices or alike. So again, go back 20 years and benefits were possibly private medical, a car if you needed it, where now it's become, almost like a smorgasbord of options that
It
an
has.
employer
You're
can
right. Yeah.
provide. And this is the difference that it makes, and therefore it expands our role far more dramatically into that benefit area rather than just being the people that push the button on the P11D on the 6th of July.
Yeah. I know one of the key questions we get a lot on the PQT show when it comes to payrolling benefits is its potential impact or people falling foul of certain rules and regulations in relation to things like national minimum wage and other elements. From your perspective, obviously at the Payroll Centre, you're training professionals up and down the UK and beyond. What are some of the key changes that payroll professionals really do need to be preparing for or indeed be aware of, such as giving a benefit potentially impacting a national minimum wage level or something along those lines?
Yeah, I think it's a few. National minimum wage is obviously the key one. When it comes to salary sacrifice, for instance, you cannot sacrifice below national minimum wage. And as we build up a far more structured, I guess, benefit package with more and more moving into that possible position, there is therefore a much higher risk that that could therefore be broken. It's not negotiable. If there is a positive, it's not a naming and shaming item. But
Sure.
principally, it does become more of an audit, more of a control, and therefore it does add quite a lot of process to a department to ensure that they're managed correctly. But on the other side of that, moving away from that, it's actually managing third-party vendor, it's managing the correct values, it's managing your reporting, and ensuring that people have got the best strategy for themselves. But then separately, I guess there are many other, I guess, caveats to them that employer has to be very aware of. If a member of staff goes on maternity, suddenly that has an enormous impact on not only the benefit, but the employer costs, the transactional position that it's in. If somebody goes long-term sick, all of a sudden it's just not a matter of, well, we'll stop the pay and give them the statutory. It's we'll stop the pay, we'll give them the statutory, but hang on a second. How does that affect their pension, their car, their private medical, the salary sacrifice holiday scheme where they bought their. So I think it's a two-sided coin. Number one, obviously, it creates enormous value to the staff, but secondly, it creates just as much resource requirement in payroll to ensure that you're staying on top of it and you're obviously complying with it.
Really highlights the level of expertise that's still required within payroll as well. A lot of these I call them viral making headlines, really, about how payroll people were going to be replaced, this, that, and the other. It's still incredibly complex. And we're just talking about domestic UK legislation here. When you start to scale this out across global, it gets even more complicated. So I think people can be a little bit more assured about the complexity here, because this is, we have really seasoned payroll professionals come onto the webinars that we co-host together on PQT. And it's not always clear. Sometimes there can be 6 nuanced answers to the same question, and payroll can be complex. And even when we talk about the new rules that have come in, I think I read that they're not mandatory yet, but they still take time. We need to plan in advance. They say planning prevents poor performance. What are the things that you would recommend the payroll teams that listen to this, or payroll experts listening to this, start planning for now to avoid any kind of last minute chaos?
Well, I think if we're looking at the mandatory side of it, there's quite a lot. If we look at the mandatory payrolling of benefits, we have had, obviously, and I'd probably let you say, the extension for a further year.
Yeah.
So this was for us, allegedly, and we'll take that as you like. But principally, the timeline has moved out till 2027. The thing is, this is not something that can be left until 2027 because there is so much, I guess, preparation, so much detail, so much change that you need to understand, especially if, and if you haven't, you should read the technical note that came out on it fairly recently. In principle, you can almost break it down into 5 key areas. So firstly, it's actually getting up to speed with what's going on. So whether it be the fact that we're going to have new reporting, new requirements, the requirement for Class 1A national insurance to be in real time, how does it affect the considerations around voluntarily moving before? So just understanding the change, because really this is huge. And I say, if you have read the technical notes, you'll see that what we're going to be doing is basically replicating the P11D electronically. So today it's a fairly fluid and fairly easy process in relation to voluntarily payrolling. We're going to move into a world where you're literally going to replicate the P11D through the FPS. It's then understanding, I guess, the internal effect that this is going to have. it's a changing process. So it is not what you do today, which is going to mean new procedures. If you run a half decent payroll department, your procedures manual is going to have to be reviewed. How are you going to resource this change? Because it suddenly becomes a monthly process, and it may actually be a process you don't even do. If you look at a lot of the bureau, for instance, you
Yeah.
have a separate tax department who are usually in charge of managing this. If you look at a smaller business, it could be an accountant that manages PLM&D at the end of the year. So principally, it's a change of resource, but it's also a change in cash flow. And this is something that people very easily overlook. You're talking about Class 1A National Insurance to start with, which has been an annual return by the 21st of July each year. For companies, this can be a substantial amount of money that you accrue through the year to pay in July. Well, that'll go as well. So you're talking about month-to-month cost. You're talking about cumulative costs throughout the year where you'd usually have an annual. So there has to be a change in cash flow as well. Talking and communication, you've got providers. If you have benefits, then you have external providers. Are you talking to them? Are you looking at things like when do your benefits renew? Because you might want to change that to actually be more in line with the tax year. How do they report to you? How are they going to report to you going forward? Then probably the two most important ones is firstly, your software provider. So your payroll system is going to change, and it's going to change fairly dramatically. So what's the implications? What's their timelines of development? Now, they're not going to promise anything probably yet, because we're not talking really until the autumn that we're going to see anything hard
Sure.
in respect of technical detail. But then how are they going to do other areas like managing the payslip? What's it going to look like? How is it going to change? How are they going to manage 50% tax limits, which I can tell you quite clearly through my knowledge that a number of them don't. What about the manual side of this when you move forward? And then finally, it's the staff themselves. So the communication, making sure they understand the change, the effects on tax, and really running trials, going through the process, and ensuring that by the time we get to 2027, you have an erudite solution, an erudite resource, and an erudite process. So it's not something you can leave till next year. This should be something you've already started and should have a plan. It's a project in
Absolutely.
its
Yeah,
own
absolutely
right.
agree. It's sage advice. It's time for people now to start allocating resources in advance so they're not panicking later on. Do you know yet what the operational process will actually look like once all the rules are live, or is that a little bit too soon to
No, yeah,
predict?
we know what it's gonna be. Obviously, in relation to benefits, if you take the PLMD as your start point, you will have a cash equivalent value. That doesn't change. The difference is dividing it by pay period and working it out through the year. So you're talking about real-time taxation on your ratio benefit through the year. So that we know. That's always been the case. We know for a fact that Class 1A National Insurance, which is annual, will go real time in line, but we already have a process for that for other things like large termination payments. The big change, however, is going to be at the end of the year and also the FPS. So the FPS, as I say, is going to see a lot of new fields, minimum of sort of 20, 30 fields added to it, which will, as I say, replicate the P11D. But it's then, I guess, the ad hoc or off payroll, as we'd like to call it, change, because you'll still have till July to complete the job. So it could be that by the time you finish the payroll in April, you don't have all the information. So you're then going to be in a place where you're going to be manually updating HMRC through to July, but you won't have the ability to take the tax. So people are going to end up with tax owed, kind of as they do now, but quantitatively very differently to where it is today. So the learning, education, and communication with staff to understand what this is going to look like is going to be fairly dramatic. I guess the other key aspect that we don't know is really that final model of how that I guess, unclaimed tax is going to be received. I mentioned the 50% limit earlier. Remember, you can only take 50% of somebody's paying tax. It is highly likely with multiple benefits that will be breached every single month,
Yeah, I can
which will
see
mean
that.
that you'll never have the money to take the tax back. Now, historically, you'd get a P800 from HMRC. They would tell the individual the tax that they still owe, and more than likely have the option of either paying it or putting it on their tax code in the next year. And usually they'll take the latter. Obviously, the issue you'll have is the benefits will still be there in that next year. They'll have an even lower tax code in the next year, which means you're basically just kicking the can down the road. And it could be a case that the tax just never gets paid. So we really need to understand, I guess, the instrument that HMRC want to achieve. And that's probably one of the most open parts of it, along with that final reporting.
Sure. Now, I know that at Payroll Centre, I know the work that you do, Richard, and this is why I've got you on the show because you're a real expert in this field. You've already started to help some payroll professionals to start manage this transition effectively. I know you're working with your delivering training. If people are listening or watching this and they're thinking, right, what everything Richard has said has resonated, and I'm not quite sure where to get started. What kind of support is out there? How are the Payroll Centre helping those payroll professionals? Are there any red flags they can be looking out for in advance? And maybe you can give them some guidance here.
Yeah, absolutely. On the training side, just bigging us up, we have a
Sure.
half-day course for the Payrolling and Benefits Mandatory, and we've seen around 350 through it already. Part of the, I guess, use of the course is at the point you take it, you get all the information that we know, but it also then gives you access to what will be an ongoing portal. So
Nice.
as further change comes in, you'll get access to everything as it happens through the portal. So it's a point in time course, but a continual delivery up till 2027. So I think there's a lot of value in that. We've certainly
Very
seen
good.
that from the people who are coming onto it. Add to that, as I said, and I can happily sort of go outside of the Payroll Centre, including the likes of CIPP and various other institutes who are giving out as much information as they can, whether it be through newsletters, blogs, updates, magazines, whatever it may be. So I think it's just a case in the majority of cases, if you are unsure, get some training, because obviously you then have also the reciprocal situation of being able to ask questions
Yeah.
of the experts. After that, I think it's just about keeping on top and keeping the knowledge, because as I said, by the time we get to autumn, we're going to see possibly two really, really big things happening. Number one is this and all of the output, hopefully guidance, touch wood, that we're going to get from it. But I also mentioned earlier the key changes next year to sickness from April, which is all going to land at about the same time in relation to the guidance and information. So I think enjoy your summer, have a holiday.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as soon as summer's over, I think we are going to be festooned with stuff. Hence, as I mentioned, we're going to run a further course on that one as well,
Sure.
because I think
Well,
people
hey, welcome to the world of payroll, and I'll make sure there's a link
Absolutely.
to your the Payroll Centre in the episode notes. So people who are interested in finding out more about the Payroll Centre, go straight through to the episode notes, and you can see that information. I think also just to labour the point, there's a reason a lot of people are talking about this in social media. Well, there's a lot of articles being posted, as you say, not just yourselves but other institutes talking about this. There's a reason they're talking about it early. And they know it's going to have a big impact, and they really are trying to encourage payroll professionals to get ahead of themselves here, start training, start getting ready for the transition now. So as you said, you're not left holding the baby with the bathwater later on. I think it's really important and really really good advice to start taking some relevant steps.
Absolutely.
I also want to ask you, outside of flexible benefits and payrolling benefits, Richard, because you've been in this industry for an awful long time. 39 years. So
And
what has kept you in this industry? What are you excited about? What do you love about it? And where do you think it's headed? 3 questions in one, sort of the
okay,
cardinal sin of a
lack,
podcast host here. But yeah,
a
I'll
lack
let you
of
take the floor.
adventure, a lack of adventure on my side. I think I've had quite an interesting career in payroll, where, as we mentioned, I spent 20 years doing it, but I was very lucky that I did it in blue chip companies. So from retail banking to music to investment banking to coffee. I mean, amazing companies, all going in an amazing direction when I was with them. Obviously, as soon as I left, they all capitulated, but that's by the by.
Well, I should add, you also became a very well-versed barista because you came into offices
Absolutely.
and gave us an amazing coffee taste testing. I remember your passion for that coming through in
Yeah, and
spades.
and I have a phenomenal level of caffeine acceptance as well, but that's by the way. I then moved out of that into some very, very different roles and very lucky. So 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I moved to a home-based role where I travel 25, 30,000 miles a year, meeting people, talking about their solutions within a provider, which was SD World, Ceridian at the time, SD Works. I then had the opportunity to work and manage operations within a bureau. So very fast moving, very high change, big turnover. And then because of the situation of our purchase, having the opportunity then say, well, actually, I've now been involved and worked and done this industry for 30 odd years. What can I give it back? So having the opportunity for the last 9 years to actually be on the other side. So I haven't touched a payroll really for 9 years, but taking the expertise, knowledge, not only in payroll, but my background is very training orientated.
Yeah. And you've trained some of the brightest stars in payroll as well. I know that. I
I'd
also
like
know which there's something as well which is worth just amplifying, I think, which is you are one of the few, I say it's still a few, there are more coming now that have made it from payroll process and administration operations right through to C-suite. And that's
mm,
something a lot of payroll professionals want to get to. There's a lot of conversation now about whether there should or should not be something such as a chief payroll officer. I know that Pete Tiliakos is really behind this this initiative that we need more chief payroll officers. Well, what's your view? I know that you've made it to C-suite without becoming a chief payroll officer. You've made it as a COO and as a managing director in other areas. What's your view on the chief payroll officer? And are there any advice you could give to those that want to make it to C-suite?
Attention payroll leaders. If you're listening to this, you already know that payroll has never been more complex. Compliance risks are rising, skilled talent is scarce, and getting it wrong can cost your business way more than just money. It can cost you trust, retention, and of course, brand reputation. I'm Nick Day, host of this show and also CEO of JGA Recruitment Group, specialist global payroll recruiters. Here at JGA, we're so passionate about payroll, we've even turned it into music. Don't believe us? Head to your favorite audio platform and search for Payroll Powers the World, and you can quite literally join us in song about how we believe payroll deserves its moment in the boardroom to shine. At JGA, we'd like to think our passion shines through to our recruitment results as well. With a 97% retention rate and an average 19-day job brief to hire success rate, we work fast, we work strategically, and we work with purpose to connect you to the hidden payroll talent that job ads and direct search methods will simply never reach. So if you're hiring or indeed planning to hire, why not partner with the experts that are shaping the future of payroll? Partner with jgarecruitment.com today, or better yet, drop me a message directly, and together we can make sure your next payroll hire is your best one yet.
I think it is so dependent on the business and where the payroll
I would
sits
agree.
within it. I think there are certainly industries within the UK, especially, where the payroll itself is still a function. It's still a resource. But the difference now is the noise that comes out of the payroll is very different to a decade ago. So you're
Yeah.
looking in a position where you have more of a voice. Absolutely, you certainly make a significant difference. And if you sort of go back a couple of years ago, Nick, we were talking very, I guess, closely in relation to being a profit maker. So there is
Yeah, for sure. That's still my view.
nothing to say
Yeah.
that payroll cannot make money. So I think in a lot of UK businesses, it is still the case that you're not a shouter in the corner, but you are an influencer. You are I guess, a far more conjoined part of a management team. But moving up to C-suite is very, very different because we're moving away from process. We're moving into, and this can often be quite a difficult one for people to understand, is what is the C-suite's role? And the C-suite's role is strategy and income. And that's it. People are a resource. Money is money. It's turnover. It's profit. It is what it is. So you have to put a very, very different head on. And that head is, what is the best thing for the business? How will we make or become bigger? And how do we make more money for the shareholders? And I know that sounds quite aggressive and quite thin, but that's what it is.
It is.
So
I agree.
you can't come into that environment and complain about day to day. You can't come into that environment looking at changing your reward package. We're looking at a far more holistic view of the direction the business needs to take and the decisions that have to be made.
Yeah,
I
it's a
think
higher level of conversation.
absolutely. But I think there are now a lot more scenarios where the payroll manager can easily sit at that level. You would suggest possibly more so where it's a more global environment and therefore a more global payroll provider where it has
Yeah.
so many more intricate parts within the global business. I guess also is the actual ability of that person and what they do and what they add to the business. Are they purely processing or are they a more strategic member of the management team? So I think it certainly can pass into that senior leadership, but it's only where it fits into, I guess, the model that the senior leadership
Yeah.
wants it to take. So,
Yep.
you know, it's a small percentage, I would suggest, but it
Personally,
is a
for me,
suggestion.
I think it's only really going to happen where there's a payroll element to that business. I
Oh,
think
absolutely.
if there's no payroll element to the business in terms of its productization or its offering, I can't see it happening yet. I think I just can't see them making that step. But I think if there's a payroll element to the business, whether it's payroll software, vendor, training, then
Oh,
of course, chief
completely.
payroll officers is way, way more important. And that's why I think that element is so important.
Because you're
I
then
think
bringing in
also,
you're then bringing in that word operations.
yeah,
You're not gonna sit on it as a CEO or a COO or
no,
a CFO, necessarily. It's the integral nature of you being the head of the operation that takes you to a point where the C-suite wants you there. And
what I
if you
do
look
love is you mentioned the profit piece. I think sometimes people struggle to understand this because I think it's probably never going to happen where payroll makes more profit than what it pays out because wages are typically the most expensive cost of any business. But when we talk about this, what we're saying is every penny you save is a penny added to the profit. So we're not actually making money by selling something in that instance. It's about where we can make the savings, where we can be more efficient, where we can be more productive and everything, where we can spot a trend that we can report back that actually changes the way maternity is utilized or whether benefits utilized or whether we can reduce absences, whatever it might be from our an analytical work. Every penny saved effectively is an extra penny of profit made. And
But I think also,
that's the
and I think
that's
also
the strategic thinking.
it's having a very global mentality to what's happening in the industry. You're
Yeah.
not an island, okay? You may think you are, and it may feel like it, but what do other people do? Are you doing your research? Are you looking at trends? Are you understanding the full bandwidth, for instance, of where savings can be made or efficiencies, as you quite rightly said? Or, as we all know at the moment, the leverage of technology, whether it be AI, whether it be robotic process, whatever it comes from. There's value in all of these things. And even in our part of the industry where we're supporting payroll, I'm probably spending almost as much time looking at AI solution, chat GPT, robotics as I am writing manuals now. Because,
Yeah.
if I'm going to create an e-learning solution, I'm using Avatar. Okay, I'm using that AI to work with me at an API level to be developing, for instance, the scripts and so on and so forth. If you have an on-demand online YouTube course, I'm not going to sit in front of a camera with a PowerPoint slide next to me. I'm having an avatar, and it might be me, which would be really horrific. But you've got to continue to, I guess, drive and not see, I guess, technology as an enemy or a people reducer, but what it can do very quickly, and as I'm teaching people to suck eggs, is really to maximize what you can do to the best you can do it. And I think now, if you'd have asked me 2 years ago, that wouldn't have been my answer. But I think
No, that's fair.
today it
Changed.
is. It's maximization, but also quality. The quality, whether it be producing something, reporting something, checking something, you know, we all strive for perfection, and AI can help
It
massively.
can help augment what we're already doing. But I think also, there is a talent crisis in payroll. I see that in the world of recruitment. So people are trying to they need to find support to be able to deliver what they need to do with the resources that they have. And if you can't get additional headcount in because of budgets or whatever else, or you can't find the talent, maybe you're not working with a great agency like ourselves, whatever the problem is, you need to find other ways around it. And obviously, AI is a great tool for augmenting what we do, for saving us some of that time, for reducing some of that workload. So I couldn't agree more with everything that you've just said.
Yeah,
But let's
and
open the
I
go
was
on.
gonna say, just to finish that as well, I mean, in the last 3 years especially, we have seen more and more, bureaus especially, accounting firms, et cetera, really looking for support for what we call green to green. So going from a green person with no skills to a green person on the traffic light who understands payroll. So we are spending a huge amount of time, say, especially with the larger businesses, on designing learning plans, succession planning, and also knowledge planning to try and get people to get those skill sets into the industry. And I say in the last 3 years especially, that's grown exponentially.
Well, I should mention here then, actually, before we open the vault, which I was about to do, is you mentioned green to green. Of course, you have your own training platform called ACT, which works on a RAG system, doesn't it? Red, amber, green, in terms of your level of expertise. So if there are people listening to this and they want some upskilling through a platform, utilizing the latest technology, and really to understand where so it's not where the training requirements are needed, I think is the best. That's what it does, doesn't it? It kind of highlights where there are gaps in your team, gives you a red, amber, and green sort of score, if you like, to know where you might need some training resource, where you may need some upskilling. And we hadn't mentioned it before this because I know we were talking about something slightly different, but maybe a good opportunity to bring ACT to the table, Richard,
Yeah,
if you want to let our listeners
absolutely.
know about it.
And it uses loads of AI now, which is
Well, there you go.
very good to say. So principally, it's exactly that. So it's assessing staff's knowledge, it's assessing their level of ability, and it goes through all levels from the very core basic all the way up to very advanced. Principally, you're using it as a tool to understand, firstly, the level of knowledge your team have got, but also understanding where the gaps are. So your skills gaps. And as Nick quite rightly said, it will use a multiple choice to come up with a RAG solution with a ton of reporting to you, the manager, around exactly where you're sitting. Principally, then it gives you the tools and the position to then fill the gaps, to go for green. So it has e-learning, it has manuals, but also you can purchase days of training where we will create bespoke training to just do the elements you need. And then you just keep retesting and retesting, advancing and advancing. The system updates obviously every time anything new comes or there's a new tax year. So in principle, it's kind of a one-stop knowledge shop. It doesn't take away the requirement for instance, a payroll update, which everybody needs every year. And we certainly see that with our 94% retention. But what it does is it ensures that when you actually sort of start segmenting knowledge and topic and subject, that your guys are up in the right positions skill wise. Best example I can give you, just really to sort of finish it off, is where we see automation as a negative. So a prime example, court orders. If I do a test with 30 people in the bureau around court order knowledge, it will be terrible. And they'll happily agree. Okay. Why? Because the computer's doing all of it. So they could be talking 30% to 45% correct answering, which is fine because that's what the technology is for. But then when Billy Bob rings you up, and sorry, I've used this gag a few times in my life. When Billy Bob rings you up and says, I've got a new court order and I don't understand it, it's no good for the payroll manager to go, well, don't worry, Bob, because neither do I.
No, true.
And I think
I think I'm going to take it slightly off piece here. I'm aware we're talking
absolutely.
about payrolling benefits, but there's another element to this. And obviously, I'm going to put my recruitment hat on here. Where actually AI, for all its benefits, sometimes makes us go back to basics. And this is where I think ACT has a really important role to play in a slightly different way. And I'll highlight this because we use it at JJ Recruitment sometimes to assess payroll candidates for our clients, because quite frankly, it's a fantastic tool for doing so. But interestingly, with AI now and GPT or Claude or whatever, Gemini, whatever it is you want to use on the LLM, people are now using those to write their CVs. So, okay, it makes sense. You want to try and make it grammatically correct and look pretty. But what happens is you post a payroll job out there now on LinkedIn or Indeed, wherever you want to put it, you'll get hundreds of applications in 24 hours. Problem you'll get, and I see this at scale, is 90% of them all look exactly the same. They've put the same job spec into GPT and said, make my application fit this. And they all come out like a homogenized group of CVs that are all identical. But what's really challenging now for hiring managers is, how do we understand or assess whether these payroll people can actually do the job they've applied for when GPT has created the CV that fits? So what happens is you get loads of people, sometimes people have never done payroll in their life, but they have this CV that looks like they can do everything. So you always have to go back to basics now and go, I used to be able to assess people from my expertise in the industry, but now you go, well, they all look the same. How do I really know who can generally calculate or understand a court order or process SSP or understand? Because the CV tells me that they can do everything, and of course the reality is that it can't. So ACT has been a fantastic tool for us to help distinguish, when we get these CVs that all look the same, who can really do the work and who can't, and it's a really good assessment tool. So if you are recruiting directly and you're not using a wonderful agency like ourselves, that's fine. You might actually want to think about introducing something like ACT just to help you overcome the fact that right now CVs are less reliable than they've ever been. I've done this for over 20 years, and it's really hard now to understand, unless you know the sector, you know the people that are applying personally, to really know whether they can do what they say they can do.
Yeah, and it actually it cuts across other things as well, Nick. So good examples, qualifications. How do you know that somebody can do it? How do you know they've got the level of ability? So within our qualifications platform, we have ACT. So you go through an assessment which tells us what level you should be doing. Okay, because there is no point in somebody with the best ever fake CV coming into your business, making you spend $5,000 or whatever on senior qualifications for them to absolutely blow them. So we use it, but then we have the secondary problem is, are they then writing the assessments, or is ChatGPT? So it's a vicious circle.
It is a vicious circle. It's more challenging. I mean, we get a lot of CVs now with qualifications written on them, and when you challenge them on it, they go, "Oh, I don't have that qualification. It was on your CV. Oh, I didn't do that. That's coming from GPT." Well, you haven't checked it, and now it looks like you have this qualification when you don't, and that's a little bit misleading.
I guess one of the other good things as well is people aren't very good at checking what it's doing. And remember, it's just going to the internet. So the likelihood is, when you start seeing American legislation halfway through an assessment, it's usually a bit of a giveaway.
Yeah, I've seen 401ks on an English CV on more than one occasion. Yeah, it happens a lot.
We've had it.
And we have to make sure we're clear. It's what we do as a profession. But listen, if you're recruiting directly, good luck, but be mindful of some of these things. And if you don't want to work with an agency like ourselves, you may want to think about getting something like ACT in to your recruitment process. You might find it's really valuable.
But I also think there is a second here as well, and that is, it's quite an industry standard that we rely on people that are going to have the skill set already to run into the role. And in today's world, today's job market, and today's challenges, especially with possibly cost of recruitment, people shouldn't sort of hide away from actually training them yourself. And I think, there are not only us, but others as well, provide literally training from start to finish, whether it be a form of pseudo apprenticeship or whatever it may be. But don't be scared off by bringing in people to mold yourself and give the knowledge yourself, because number one, they'll be molded by you to have the right level of skill. And number two, if you've invested in them, they're more highly likely going to stay. So I think it's very important people don't get fixated with high salary, high skill, because again, as you quite rightly said, they might not even have the skills when it actually comes to it. And then you're in a very sticky position where they're not going to pass probation, and there's cost, and there's rehire, and you've got to give more money to Nick and various other things as well. So I think you've got to have a very open church, a broad church now when it comes to
It may
staff.
sound counterintuitive, Richard, but I'm actually in full agreement. And I do talks at local schools trying to recommend payroll as a career. We don't really do an awful lot of recruitment at that level of the entry level for that reason. You know, people need to train, need to invest in a slightly different way. What I will say is on the rehiring piece, so you talked about retention earlier. Ours is just over 97%. So it's very rarely if we find someone for you, that person doesn't work out. But that's what you're investing in, hoping 20 years of
exactly.
looking at CVs and understanding people, we're going to get the right person in, so you don't have to rehire. That's the point.
And that's
So,
why
yeah.
we come to you, Nick, because it is that exceptional pre-work that goes in that gives you the trust in an area that you're not going to get from all of these many sort of bureaus that sort of advertise a broader picture.
We need more employers giving people chances in payroll at the grassroots level, because otherwise the industry will slowly start to shrink, and we can't have that. It's such a great career for people now,
And everybody will be as
let's
old as
encourage
us.
that for sure. Look, I know we've gone slightly off piece here, Richard, but I could chat to you for hours. We often do when we meet up over a beer or we're cycling from A to B. But let's open the payroll vault. 3 quick-fire questions for you. We'll put this into a special episode later on in the season with all of our experts we've had on the podcast. We get to hear their sage advice right at the end. So number 1 for you, one piece of advice you wish you'd been given at the start of your payroll career.
Drive harder in business. So don't accept what you have or what you do, and drive harder for what you think you're worth.
Nice. I like that. What book, resource, or even life philosophy has had the most impact on your payroll journey?
On payroll,
Yeah.
I'd
Or
say
career journey.
resource. My resource would actually be my network. Actually, anybody with half a brain cell can learn, can do a good job, can work hard, but it's taking and understanding the value that others have.
Funny enough, you and I have connected on that basis. I remember a conversation I had with one of your previous CEOs who came to me and said, Nick, I need a particular individual, anyone you know that matches this profile. And we hadn't gone to market, we hadn't done any searches. And I went, I know one person who could do your job, and his name's Richard. And I don't know if he's looking. And you were, and you ended up getting it. And that was all down to network. We'd obviously taken it to a different level because we'd cycled across Europe together. I knew you very, very well. But had we not taken that level of, I guess, connection and networking, that may never have happened.
But it's not just your own development, it's about knowledge as well.
Yeah, for
there
sure.
are people in this industry a hell of a lot cleverer than me, who know a hell of a lot more than I do and make me look amateur. And I happily, not many thankfully, but I will happily put my hands up to that fact. So you're not an island. Nobody in payroll is, and you've got to absorb, talk and listen to others. And that's where that network's key.
I'd also say, if anyone watches Payroll Question Time, Simon Parsons can do that to the best of us.
Absolutely. But you say you can't learn it all in a book. There is no book. There is no book called How to Become a Manager that will teach you how to be a manager. The only way you become a manager is exploration, error, correction, and moving forward.
Yeah, I always like the Michael Jordan quote, right? He missed more shots than anybody else, which is why he managed to make more than anybody else, right?
Yep.
Everyone focused on the scores he got, but not the ones he missed.
My favorite's a golf one. The harder you work, the more you learn, the luckier you will be.
Lucky you get. Yeah, I know that one's very good. Last one. What's the one prediction you would boldly make about the future of payroll? You can take this as far into the future as you wish.
Hoverboards, spaceships. No. I think we are going to see far more hybrid roles. And what I mean by that is not working from home. That's done. I'm talking about expansive roles across larger areas. But I also see that the role itself will change significantly due to a variety of technologies. Even if you look at HMRC last week and this week, they're talking about self-service, they're talking about transition. That's just going to become more and more the norm. The key difference will be the technology that sits behind it, such as AI, robotics, etc., etc. So I think there will be obviously a bigger and bigger shift change. We've seen in technology within payroll software, if you went back 20 years and said, real-time payroll, people would have laughed at you. So it is just going to, hello, Karen, and it is just going to continually move, continually change, and continually develop in that respect as well.
Fantastic. Well, look, for those of you who want to find out more, as I mentioned, there will be a link to the payrollcentre.co.uk, which is the URL in the show notes of this episode, where you can find out more about ACT, you can find out more about the training courses, you can find out more about our wonderful guest today, Richard George. There's a profile on there about him as well on the show, as well as the other tutors on the website. So please do check that out. I will also put a link to the last episode we did or the first episode we ever did, which I believe was on GDPR back in 2018. There we are. So I'll put that back as a bit of a throwback episode. If anyone wants to see a younger, more youthful sounding host and guest, then please do check that out from 2018. It was episode number 1 for the archives. Richard George, friend, colleague, passionate payroll person, thank you ever so much for joining me on the Payroll Podcast. Always a pleasure. I look forward to being with you again on the next episode of Payroll Question Time. So for those not familiar with that show, Google it, go and have a look on PQT or Payroll Question Time, and join us for the next webinar. We host those once a month, although the next one is in September. So please do check that out as well. But Richard, thank you ever so much for joining me, my friend. And I look forward to catching up with you again very soon.
Great to talk, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Global teams are more connected today than ever. But managing payroll, HR, and IT can still feel fragmented. But Deel simplifies global work with one platform that keeps everything running smoothly. No compliance guesswork, no third-party payroll, just seamless operations backed by 24/7 expert support. That's why over 35,000 companies trust Deel to handle their global workforce. Visit deel.com/nickday to see how Deel can help. That's DEEL.com/NICKDAY. Deel, your forever people platform.